Hegel once observed that comedy is in fact superior to tragedy, and humorous reasoning superior to grandiloquent reasoning. Although Lincoln does not possess the grandiloquence of his historical actions, but as an average man of the people, he has his humor. Yeah, Lincoln was very humorous, how he would present his argument many times. He had a great sense of humor. And this is true what Hegel said. If you're able, in an argument, if you could present humor, you got a good chance of winning your argument. Humor wins over, comedy wins over, is superior, if you will, to grandiloquent reasoning. Now, in his comments, let's look at all what was just said here. Marx praised Lincoln's proclamation to end slavery in the South, that is, the states that seceded from the Union. He describes Lincoln's proclamation as the most important document in the history of the U.S. since the founding of the Union. This document, according to Marx, indicated a development to a new level in the Civil War, to a revolutionary war, denotes the tearing up of the old American Constitution. Marx, while showing Lincoln's limitations, emphasized that Lincoln's place in history would be to that next of Washington. I mean, look at that prediction. Isn't President's Day, what's President's Day that we celebrate today, boys and girls? Isn't that Lincoln's and Washington's birthday? I mean, that he would be next to that of Washington. That's an amazing prediction he made in 1862. Moreover, Marx suggested that Lincoln, an average man of goodwill, was placed at the top as an outcome of social circumstances, normal interplay of the forces of universal suffrage. He also implied that Lincoln's humorous reasoning superior to grandiloquent reasoning, could be understood from his past and present circumstances, that is, as an average man of the people. Okay. His next article, which was also in 1862, Marx wrote, The Dismissal of McClellan. Now, McClellan was the head general at the beginning of the Civil War for the North. But the problem was McClellan was a Southern sympathizer. So the way he fought the battles, he didn't fight to win the battles for the North. Okay. Now, McClellan was very popular, so Lincoln had to wait till the right time before he could fire McClellan. Okay, because he knew he was very popular throughout the United States. He was a very popular general. Okay, although he was purposely not winning the war for the North. So anyway, Karl Marx, in The Dismissal of McClellan, described the conditions in which Lincoln dismissed McClellan from his post as commander of the Army of the Potomac. He wrote, McClellan's dismissal, that is Lincoln's answer to the election victories of the Democrats. Yeah, after 2 years that Lincoln was in power, you have to understand, the Democrats started winning House seats. Okay, so, now that could be looked at, oh, Lincoln's in trouble. He has to rethink everything about the Civil War. This is very interesting how Lincoln handled that. And McClellan was a very popular general by the Democrats. At that time, the Republicans were the party of revolution, if you will. They wanted to end slavery, or many of the Republicans did. The Democrats were against it. The Democratic journals had stated with the most positive assurance that the election of Seymour as governor of New York State would entail the immediate revocation of the proclamation in which Lincoln declared slavery abolished in secessia from January 1st, 1863. The paper that took this prophetic imprint had hardly left the press when their favorite general, their favorite because next to a great defeat, he most feared a decisive victory, that's Marx's humor right there, was deprived of his command and was sent back to private life. We recall that McClellan replied to the proclamation of Lincoln with a counter-proclamation, an order of the day to his army, in which he indeed forbade any demonstration against the president's measure, but at the same time let slip the fatal words, "It is the task of citizens through the polls to rectify the government's errors or to judge its actions." McClellan, at the head of the main army of the U.S., therefore appealed from the president to the impending elections. He threw the weight of his position into the scales. A pronouncement in the Spanish manner side, he could not have demonstrated his hostility to the president's policy more strikingly. Accordingly, after the election victory of the Democrats, this is in the House and other elections, governors, the only choice left to Lincoln was either to sink to the level of a tool as the pro-slavery Compromise Party, or with McClellan to remove from under its point of support in the Army. McClellan's dismissal at this moment is accordingly a political demonstration. In any case, however, it had become indispensable. Halleck, the commander-in-chief, in a report to the Secretary of War, had charged McClellan with direct insubordination. For shortly after the defeat of the Confederates in Maryland on October 6, Halleck ordered the crossing of the Potomac, particularly as the low water level of the Potomac and its tributaries favored military operations at the time. In defiance of this order, McClellan remained immobile, under the pretext of his army's inability to march due to lack of provisions. In the report mentioned, Halleck proves that this was a hollow subterfuge, that compared with the Western Army, the Eastern Army enjoyed great privileges in respect of the commissariat, and the supplies still lacking could have been received just as well south as north of the Potomac. Yeah, so McClellan was saying he couldn't move his troops because there wasn't enough supplies, and he didn't have enough food. That was a lie. Here, Marx pointed out that Lincoln's dismissal of McClellan was an outcome of social circumstances, as the election victories of the Democrats and McClellan's counter-proclamation and insubordination. McClellan's dismissal, according to Marx, had become necessary for President Lincoln to do. It had become indispensable. It was in the workers' interest that a pro-slavery general such as McClellan demonstrated his hostility to the President's policy, be deprived of his command, and be returned to private life. Now, Karl Marx, in 1865, on behalf of the Working Men's International Association, wrote a letter to Lincoln congratulating him on his re-election to the presidency of the United States. So this is Marx writing to Lincoln directly. I don't know if you knew this, boys and girls. Marx wrote a letter to Lincoln, yeah. Sir, we congratulate the American people upon your re-election. By this time, the Civil War was won, for all practical purposes, by a large majority. If your resistance to the slave power was the reserved watchword of your first election, the triumphant war cry of your re-election is death to slavery. When an oligarchy of 300,000 slaveholders dared to inscribe for the first time in the annals of the world slavery on the banner of armed revolt, when on the very spots where hardly a century ago the idea of one great democratic republic had first sprung up, whence the first declaration of the rights of man was issued, and the first impulse given to the European Revolution of the 18th century, when on those very spots counter-revolution with systematic thoroughness gloried in rescinding the ideas entertained at the time of the formation of the old Constitution, and maintained slavery to be a beneficent institution indeed, the only solution of the great problem of the relation of capital to labor, and cynically proclaimed property in man the cornerstone of the new edifice, then the working classes of Europe understood at once, even before the fanatic partisanship of the upper classes of the Confederate gentry had given its dismal warning that the slaveholders' rebellion was to sound the tocsin for a general holy crusade of property against labor, and that for the men of labor with their hopes for the future, even their past conquests, were at stake in that tremendous conflict on the other side of the Atlantic. By the way, boys and girls, what I just read was one sentence. Isn't that amazing? That's an amazing sentence Marx wrote. Anyway, putting that fantastic grammar aside, as an amazing sentence. Everywhere they bore, therefore, patiently the hardships imposed upon them by the cotton crisis, opposed enthusiastically the pro-slavery intervention, importunities for their betters and from most parts of Europe contributed their quota of blood to the good cause. The working men of Europe feel sure that as the American War of Independence initiated a new era of ascendancy for the middle class, so the American anti-slavery will do for the working classes. They consider it an earnest of the epoch to come that it fell to the lot of Abraham Lincoln, the single-minded son of the working class, to lead his country through the matchless struggle for the rescue of an enhanced race and the reconstruction of a social world. Yeah, I mean, look at the praise for Lincoln there. You know, as far as congratulating him on his re-election to end slavery in the United States. I mean, you could see the respect. Also, you have to understand what was happening in Europe at the time, and this was the International Working Men's International Association in England. They got their workers to go on strike. They, because at the beginning of the Civil War, the English government was ready to side with the South. Okay, and if they did, maybe the outcome would have been different. England was the most powerful country in the world then.